My father's voice cut across the marble foyer of the Sterling estate, like a velvet blade wrapped in authority. I stood 3 feet from the entrance, close enough to hear champagne glasses clinking inside, far enough that the doorman hadn't yet decided whose order to follow. Behind Richard Harmon, the ballroom glowed with the kind of light that only serious money can buy. Crystal chandeliers casting fractal rainbows across white roses arranged by someone who charged by the stem. 300 guests in there, Georgia's finest, waiting for a wedding to start. Out here, the evening air hung thick with magnolia and something sharper. Humiliation, maybe, or just the smell of old wounds reopening. I didn't raise my voice, didn't reach for the door. I stood where I was, feet planted on Italian tile imported for this exact purpose, to make people feel either welcome or utterly out of place. My shoes were sensible navy flats, the kind you can wear for 12 hours without your feet screaming. My dress was simple, off the rack from a department store that didn't require a personal shopper. I'd learned a long time ago that blending in meant choosing your battles, and tonight wasn't supposed to be a battle at all. "Father," I said. One word, not a plea, just acknowledgement that I'd heard him, that I understood the terms being offered, that I was still capable of speech even as my throat tried to close around the syllable. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, over me, through me, the same way he'd been looking for 41 years. His suit was custom, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Cufflinks flashed, the Harmon family crest, a lion rampant over crossed swords, the kind of heraldry white men in the South invented when they needed their money to look like legacy. His hair was silver now, styled with the precision of someone who had appointments with important people and couldn't afford a strand out of place. 76 years old and still standing like he owned every room he entered, which, to be fair, he usually did. "This is my son's wedding," he said, voice pitched for the small audience gathering behind him. "For people who belong to this family." The doorman, young kid, maybe 22, summer job probably, glanced down at his clipboard with the expression of someone realizing he'd walked into a minefield. "Sir, I have a Catherine Harmon listed here. Table 3, groomsmen's family section." "That's an error, cross it out." The bride's father appeared then, Senator James Crawford, a man whose face I'd seen on campaign posters and CNN panels, someone who understood the weight of words and the cost of scenes. He moved with the practiced ease of a career politician, smile already in place, hand already extending for a shake that might diffuse whatever this was. "Richard, is there a problem? Guests are waiting." My father switched modes like flipping a light. The hard edge in his voice smoothed into something warm, collegial, the tone of a man solving a small administrative hiccup at a charity gala. "No problem, James. Just a misunderstanding about the guest list. Already handled." He turned back to me, and the warmth died. His voice dropped to something only I could hear, something that landed in the space between my ribs, where he'd been carving out pieces of me since I was 8 years old. "Leave now, or I'll have security remove you. Your choice." I felt the old reflex kick in, the urge to shrink, to apologize, to vanish into the background like I'd been trained to do. But 26 years in the Army had taught me something Richard Harmon never learned: how to stand still under fire, how to assess a threat without flinching, how to choose your response instead of letting your response choose you. The memory came unbidden. Maria Reyes in a hospital bed, skin gray from chemotherapy that wasn't working, hand gripping mine with strength she shouldn't have had left. She'd made me promise something in those final days, voice barely above a whisper, but fierce with the kind of love that transcends dying. "Promise me you'll never let anyone make you small, mija. Not because of where you come from, not because of who your father is. Promise me you'll stand tall." I'd been 8 years old, crying so hard I couldn't breathe, and I'd promised. Even though I didn't understand what it meant, even though I thought standing tall was about posture, about not slouching in chairs. It took me 41 years to understand what my mother was really asking. I took one step back now, not retreat, positioning. "I'll go," I said, and my voice came out steady, clear, the way it did when I was briefing colonels or calming soldiers or staring down a threat that wanted me to break. "But not because you're asking, because I don't want to ruin Thomas's day." My half-brother stood 10 feet away in a tuxedo that fit him like it was born there, face flushed, eyes wide with the kind of confusion that comes from being 26 and realizing your family has fault lines you never noticed. Kat? I thought you were overseas or something? Retired last month. The word hung there, pregnant with everything I wasn't saying. Thomas had been 7 when I left for West Point, barely old enough to remember me beyond vague impressions of the older sister, who lived in the servants' wing and didn't come to family dinners. We'd exchanged maybe 30 words in the last 18 years. Birthday cards signed with my name and nothing else. The bare minimum of connection that allowed him to say he had a sister without having to explain why we never spoke. I remembered the last time I'd seen him before leaving for the academy. He'd been in the kitchen eating cereal, legs swinging from a chair too tall for him. I'd come down with my duffel bag packed, ready to catch the bus to the airport. "Where are you going?" he'd asked, milk dribbling down his chin. "School. When are you coming back?" I'd looked at Richard standing in the doorway, arms crossed, face carved from stone. "When I'm invited." Thomas had gone back to his cereal, not understanding. Not knowing that invitation would never come. "Thomas, go inside, I'll handle this." But one of the groomsmen had gone very still. I noticed it the way you notice a change in air pressure before a storm, the way you notice when someone who should be moving isn't. Sergeant First Class Hayes stood 20 feet to my left, tuxedo jacket unbuttoned in the Georgia heat, and his posture had shifted into something I recognized. Not quite attention, not quite at ease. Somewhere in between, the stance of someone who'd just seen their commanding officer and was trying very hard not to salute in public. Hayes had been with me in Kandahar, April 14th, 2018, the day that earned me the Distinguished Service Cross and cost me 3 soldiers I couldn't save. He'd been the one who'd pulled me out of the burning Humvee when I'd gone back for Morrison, the one who'd held my shoulder together while we waited for medevac, the one who'd refused his own Purple Heart because Ma'am took the hit for us. Another groomsman turned, stared, said something under his breath to the man next to him. Thomas, bless him, was trying. "You guys know Kat?" Hayes's eyes found mine, asking permission without words, the way good soldiers do when they're about to speak out of turn. I shook my head, barely a movement, just enough. "Not yet." "Sir," Hayes said to my father, voice careful as someone defusing a bomb. "That's—" He stopped, looked at me again, waited. Richard's attention swung toward him, irritation flashing across his face like summer lightning. "Is there a problem, young man?" Hayes stood straighter. "No, sir. I just think you should let her in." "You think?" My father's voice climbed half an octave, the way it did when someone questioned him in front of an audience. "You're going to tell me what to do at my own son's wedding?" The second groomsman stepped forward. Staff Sergeant Torres, compact and solid, the kind of man who looked like he could carry you out of a burning building and had. Torres had been the medic on our convoy. He'd been the one who'd kept Morrison alive long enough to get to surgery, who'd stitched my shoulder with field sutures while mortar fire walked closer. "Sir, with respect, you might want to reconsider." Senator Crawford was watching now, sharp eyes tracking the dynamics like a chess player 3 moves ahead. The doorman had given up on his clipboard. Guests were slowing on their way into the ballroom, phones coming out. That particular brand of attention that meant someone was about to become a story. My father pulled himself up to his full height, which wasn't much, but he'd spent decades making it feel like more. "I don't know who any of you are, but this is a private family matter. Catherine is not invited, she is not welcome, and she is leaving. Now." I turned to go. Really turn this time, because there's a difference between standing your ground and forcing people to watch you bleed. I'd learned that difference the hard way. Learned it in foster care before Richard took me in. Learned it again in the years after. I'd learned it at West Point, where I'd arrived at 18 with a chip on my shoulder the size of Georgia, and a determination to prove Richard wrong about everything he'd ever said about me. The first 6 months had been brutal. Not because of the physical training or the academic rigor, but because I'd spent 17 years learning to be invisible, and suddenly I was in a place where invisibility would get you crushed. My beast barracks squad leader had been a woman from Texas named Captain Morrison, no relation to the soldier I'd later failed to save, who'd taken one look at me and known exactly what I was running from. "You think you're the only one here who doesn't come from money?" she'd asked me during a particularly brutal ruck march. "You think you're the only one whose family didn't want them?" I'd been too tired to lie. My father said I'd quit in 6 months, then prove him wrong, but not because he's watching. because you deserve to succeed. I'd carried those words through 4 years of academy, through Ranger School, where I was one of 3 women in a class of 68, through my first deployment to Iraq, where I'd learned that fear was just information and courage was choosing to move forward anyway. Ma'am, Hayes's voice snapped me back to the present. Not loud, but carrying the kind of authority that made people stop and turn without thinking about it. I stopped. 3 other groomsmen moved to stand beside him. Tuxedo jackets unbuttoned now, and underneath, dress uniforms. Blues with ribbons I recognized, medals that meant something. The kind of thing you wear when you want people to know exactly who you are. Hayes addressed my father, not me. Sir, with all due respect, you're asking Colonel Harmon to leave? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, packed tight with implications and realizations, and the sound of a narrative cracking down the middle. Someone's phone camera clicked. Someone else inhaled sharp enough to hear. My father blinked. Excuse me? Torres stepped up beside Hayes. Colonel Catherine Harmon, United States Army, 26 years of service, retired last month with full honors. Sergeant Chen, third in line, younger than the others but steady. Chen had joined us during our second Kandahar rotation, green as spring grass and terrified of everything. I'd spent 3 months teaching him how to read terrain, how to trust his instincts, how to lead when you're scared out of your mind. He'd saved 6 soldiers during a market ambush by remembering everything I'd taught him. Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star with V device for valor, Purple Heart. Specialist Washington, voice thick with something that might have been pride or might have been grief or might have been both. Washington had been the youngest on our convoy, 19 years old, and writing letters home to his mother every night. When the IED hit, he'd frozen. I'd had to physically drag him behind cover while gunfire tore apart the air around us. Mam was our platoon leader in Kandahar, 2018, when our convoy got ambushed. I didn't move, didn't confirm, didn't deny. I just stood there the way I'd been trained to stand. The way you stand when incoming fire is landing too close, and all you can do is hold position and trust your training. Thomas made a sound, something between a gasp and a laugh, the noise of a man whose entire understanding of reality just shifted 6 inches to the left. Colonel? You're a colonel? My father's face had gone through several colors. Red, then pale, then a kind of grayish-white that meant shock was setting in. I didn't know, he managed. She never said. You never asked, I said quietly. In 26 years, you never once asked. Hayes wasn't done. He pulled out his phone, fingers moving with practiced ease, found a photo and held it out toward Thomas. I watched my half-brother take it, watched his eyes go wide, watched him mouth words that didn't come out as sound. The photo was from April 2018, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 97 degrees in the shade, and we didn't have any shade. I was in full combat gear, face streaked with dust and someone else's blood, cradling Specialist Morrison, no relation to my old squad leader, while calling for medevac on a radio that kept cutting out. Behind us, a Humvee burned. Smoke rose in columns that looked like pillars holding up a sky that wanted to fall. Morrison had taken shrapnel to the femoral artery and was going into shock. I'd already been hit in the shoulder. The round had punched through my body armor, broken my clavicle, kept going. But you don't stop for wounds when your people are dying. You apply pressure. You call for help. You stay until everyone is out, or you're too dead to stay anymore. Morrison died anyway. In my arms, while I was telling him about his daughter's first birthday party that he was going to miss, while Hayes was trying to drag me to cover because Taliban fighters were closing in, and we were running out of ammunition, while Torres was working on 2 other casualties who wouldn't make it either. 3 soldiers, 3 families who got folded flags instead of fathers, sons, brothers. 3 names I carried in a place deeper than the scar on my shoulder. Senator Crawford moved closer, politician's instincts telling him this was a story worth knowing. Colonel Harmon? The Catherine Harmon who received the DSC last year? I read about that. Most decorated female combat officer in Georgia's history. I met his eyes. Senator Crawford, it's a pleasure to meet you. Professional, neutral, giving him nothing but courtesy because that's all anyone gets until they earn more. My father was trying to recover, trying to find the script that would let him control this. Catherine, You could have told me I could have, but you made it very clear what you thought I was capable of. I remembered the last conversation we'd had before I deployed to Afghanistan. I'd come home on leave wearing my uniform, and Richard had looked at me like I was wearing a costume. "Still playing soldier?" he'd asked. "Still serving my country. When are you going to get a real job?" I'd left without answering, spent my leave in a hotel rather than sleep under his roof, sent him a postcard from Kandahar 3 months later. "Having a wonderful time. Wish you were here." He'd never responded. I turned to leave again because I was done. Truly done. And staying would only make this harder for Thomas, who didn't deserve to have his wedding turned into a battlefield. "Thomas, congratulations. Your bride is very lucky." But Senator Crawford wasn't letting me go that easily. "Colonel, surely you'll stay. My daughter would be honored to have you at her wedding." "Thank you, Senator. But I wasn't invited." I let the words land where they needed to land. Let them sit in the space between politeness and accusation. Let everyone in earshot understand exactly what had happened here. My father's hands were shaking now. "Catherine, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss." I reached into my clutch, small navy thing I'd bought specifically because it could hold exactly 3 items and nothing more, and pulled out an envelope, handed it to Thomas, not Richard. "For you. Wedding gift." Thomas opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a deed to a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Savannah, paid in full, worth somewhere north of $300,000. A check for $50,000 with honeymoon fund written in the memo line. And a card, handwritten in the careful script I'd learned from my mother before she died. I'd written it 3 nights ago, sitting in my hotel room, thinking about what Maria would have wanted for the son of the man who'd let her die alone. "Thomas, your mother wanted you to have a better start than we did. This isn't charity. It's what family does when they actually care about each other's futures. May you build a life full of integrity, compassion, and courage. May you be the man your father never learned to be." "Cat." Thomas's face crumpled. "Cat, you didn't have to." "I wanted to." My father was staring at the papers in Thomas's hands, like they were written in a language he couldn't read. "Where did you get that kind of money? You're military. You don't make—" "I make enough," I said. "When you live simply and save carefully and don't spend $40,000 on a wedding you're not invited to." The barb landed. I saw it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his eyes went hard. But before he could respond, a woman in a business suit appeared from the parking lot, walking with the purposeful stride of someone who had an appointment and was determined to keep it. Patricia Delacroix, attorney, 58 years old and sharp as cut glass. She'd handled my mother's estate when I was 8, which is to say, she'd helped probate the $300 Maria had saved in a coffee can and the ancient Toyota that barely ran. She'd done it pro bono because she believed everyone deserved dignity in death, even poor women who cleaned rich people's houses. When I'd turned 30 and started making real money, I'd hired her to manage my investments. Told her I wanted to build something that would outlast me. Something Maria would have been proud of. She smiled when she saw me. "Colonel Harmon, I'm glad I caught you." "Miss Delacroix." She turned to my father. "Mr. Harmon, I've sent the documents you need to sign regarding the October 31st payment. Have you had a chance to review them?" My father's face went blank. "What payment?" Patricia's eyebrows lifted with the kind of polite surprise that trial lawyers practice in mirrors. "The loan payment, sir. $6.7 million. Due in 2 weeks." She said it loud enough for the crowd to hear. Said it with the clarity of someone who knew exactly what bombshell she was dropping and had chosen the timing deliberately. My father's voice came out strangled. 6.7, what loan?" Patricia reached into her briefcase, pulled out a folder, handed it to him with the delicate care of someone passing over a live grenade. "The 2015 loan from CR Holdings, LLC. $8.2 million at 2% interest to prevent the foreclosure of Harmon properties. I believe you've been making payments to an account ending in 4782 for the last 9 years?" My father opened the folder. I watched his eyes move across the pages, watched comprehension dawn in stages. First confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like he'd been punched in the stomach and was still trying to figure out where the hit came from. "CR Holdings," he read aloud. Who owns CR Holdings?" Patricia smiled. "The registered agent is listed on page 4, sir." My father flipped pages, found it, stared. Catherine Reyes Harmon. I'd used my mother's name, The name Richard had tried to erase along with her existence, the name that appeared on my birth certificate and her death certificate, and nowhere else in the official record of the Harmon family. The parking lot went very quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen next. Thomas was reading over his father's shoulder now, his face cycling through emotions too fast to name. Wait, Kat, you loaned Dad $8 million in 2015? I didn't answer him. I was watching my father, watching the man who'd called me an irregularity and a mistake and a burden process. The fact that the daughter he dismissed had been the only thing standing between him and financial ruin for nearly a decade. Senator Crawford, bless his political instincts, was putting the pieces together out loud. 2015. I remember. Harmon Properties was facing a loan call from Coastal Bank, $8.2 million, and then suddenly, it vanished. I assumed you'd found investors in Atlanta. He looked at me. But it was your daughter. She bailed you out. My father's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I didn't know. She never told me. How was I supposed to? Because if you'd known, you wouldn't have taken it. I said it quietly, but the words carried. Everyone heard. Everyone understood. You would have let the bank take your company rather than accept help from the daughter you called a mistake. So I did the only thing I could. I hid who I was. I saved the legacy you cared about more than you ever cared about me. I walked to my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with 160,000 miles on it, the same car I'd been driving since my second deployment because it ran, and I didn't need more than that. Patricia walked beside me, heels clicking on pavement. Behind us, my father stood in front of 300 guests, holding papers that proved his business was built on the charity of the child he'd thrown away. I slid into the driver's seat. Patricia leaned down, spoke through the open window. He has 2 weeks to come up with the full payment. If he defaults, the terms of the contract give you 73% ownership of Harmon Properties. You become majority shareholder. I know the terms, I wrote them. She smiled. What do you want to do? I looked in the rearview mirror. My father was still standing there, papers in hand, looking like a man who'd just discovered the ground under his feet was made of glass. Thomas was trying to talk to him, but Richard wasn't listening. He was staring at my taillights, watching me leave the same way he'd watched me leave at 17 when he told me not to come back. I want him to understand, I said slowly, that respect isn't optional, that you can't treat people like garbage for 40 years and expect them to save you anyway. Patricia nodded. And if he doesn't pay? Then he learns that actions have consequences, that the daughter he underestimated owns the thing he values most, and that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn. I started the engine, drove away from the Sterling estate, away from the ballroom full of light and lies, away from the father who'd spent my entire life trying to make me small. In my rearview mirror, I saw Richard Harmon collapse into a chair someone had brought out for him. Saw Senator Crawford putting a hand on his shoulder, probably already calculating how this would affect his daughter's marriage into a family that might not be solvent much longer. Saw Thomas standing alone, holding an envelope containing more generosity than his father had ever shown me, trying to understand how the sister he barely knew had just become the most important person in his father's world. Saw Hayes and Torres and Chen and Washington standing in a line, still at attention, still watching their commanding officer drive away, still holding the line even though the battle was over. I drove for 20 minutes before pulling into a Waffle House parking lot, killing the engine and letting myself breathe. Really breathe. The kind of breathing that comes from your diaphragm and pushes out the poison that's been sitting in your lungs for decades. My phone buzzed. Text from Hayes. Ma'am, you okay? I typed back, solid, thank you for having my 6. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. Always, ma'am. You taught us that. Nobody gets left behind. I set the phone down and let my head fall back against the headrest. Through the windshield, I could see stars starting to appear in the darkening sky, pinpricks of light that had been there all along, but only showed up when everything else got dark enough to see them. My mother used to say that dignity was the only inheritance that couldn't be taken from you, that you could lose your money, your home, your name, but if you held on to who you were, nobody could strip that away. She'd said it lying in that hospital bed, 33 years old and dying from cancer that could have been treated if she'd had insurance, if Richard had helped, if the world had been built for women like her instead of against them. Promise me you'll stand tall, mija. Promise me you'll never let them make you small. I'd kept that promise. Through West Point and Ranger School and 3 combat deployments, through every time Richard dismissed me or erased me or pretended I didn't exist, through every moment when it would have been easier to disappear than to keep fighting for space, I had to carve out with my own hands. I'd stood tall, and tonight, finally, people had seen it. My phone rang. Unknown number. I considered not answering, but years of being on call for emergencies had trained that instinct out of me. Hello? Colonel Harmon, this is Senator Crawford. I sat up straighter, old habits kicking in even though he couldn't see me. Senator. His voice was warm, careful, the tone of someone who'd thought through exactly what they wanted to say. I wanted to apologize for what happened tonight. If I'd known. You didn't know because my father made sure nobody knew. That's not on you. Still, he paused. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet with me. Not about tonight. About something else. I'm listening. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. We're looking for advisors. People with real combat experience who can speak truth to power without worrying about career advancement. Your name came up in conversations even before tonight. I closed my eyes. Tried to imagine explaining to my father that the senator whose daughter was marrying his son wanted me, the irregularity, as a military advisor. Tried to imagine the look on his face when he realized that every door he'd tried to close for me had just opened 3 more. I'd be honored, Senator. Send me the details. I will. And Colonel, your mother would be proud of you. The words hit harder than I expected. Carved out a space in my chest that I'd kept sealed for 33 years. Since the day Maria Reyes died in a hospital bed holding my hand and telling me to be brave. Thank you, I managed. After he hung up, I sat in that Waffle House parking lot for another hour, watching people come and go. Families, couples, lone travelers grabbing coffee for the road. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 5 miles away, a father was discovering that the daughter he'd discarded was about to dismantle everything he'd built. Or rebuild it, I hadn't decided yet. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from Thomas. Can we talk, please? I stared at the message. Thomas was innocent in this. He'd been 7 when I left, raised by a father who'd erased me from family photos and conversations. He didn't know about Maria Reyes dying alone because Richard refused to pay for better cancer treatment. Didn't know about the years I'd spent in the servants' wing, eating dinner with the housekeeper while he sat at the family table. Didn't know that the first time Richard had called me his daughter was when a reporter asked about me after the DSC ceremony, and he'd lied smoothly about being incredibly proud. Tomorrow, I typed back. Coffee, just you and me. His response came immediately. Thank you. I started the car again. Drove to the extended stay hotel I'd booked for the week, the kind of place with kitchenettes and free breakfast and rates designed for people who needed to stretch their money. The room was clean, anonymous, decorated in shades of beige that didn't ask questions or demand answers. I hung my dress in the closet next to my uniform. Dress blues I'd worn to the retirement ceremony, ribbons arranged in perfect rows, each one representing a mission or a moment or a person I'd saved or failed to save. The uniform I'd worn when Patricia handed me the final paperwork on the loan, when I'd signed my name and made it official. I owned my father's legacy now, whether he knew it or not. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at the woman Richard Harmon couldn't see, 49 years old, silver starting to thread through dark hair I kept in a regulation bun even though I didn't have to anymore. Scar on my left shoulder from the Kandahar ambush, another on my right arm from a training accident at Fort Benning, smaller ones scattered across my hands from a childhood spent trying to be useful enough to keep. I looked at her and thought, you did good today. You stood your ground. You didn't beg. And for the first time in 41 years, that felt like enough. Outside, Savannah hummed with Friday night energy. Wedding receptions, bar crawls, tourists taking ghost tours through squares that had seen their share of hauntings. Somewhere out there, my father was probably still at the Sterling estate, trying to explain to Senator Crawford why his daughter, the decorated war hero, wasn't welcome at family events. Trying to explain how he'd accepted $8 million from a shell company without checking who owned it. Trying to explain how the child he'd called an irregularity now held his entire world in her hands. I didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vengeful. I felt tired, the bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying weight you didn't ask for and finally setting it down. Tomorrow I'd meet Thomas for coffee. We'd talk about what came next, about whether he wanted to learn how to run Harmon Properties with integrity, or whether he'd rather walk away and build something new. I'd offer him choices Richard had never given me. Next week, Patricia would file the paperwork. The clock would start ticking on the loan payment, and my father would have to decide, come up with $6.7 million in cash, or admit that the daughter he'd thrown away was now the person who controlled his legacy. Either way, he'd learn the lesson my mother had tried to teach him 33 years ago, that people are not property, that love is not conditional, that you can't build wealth on the backs of the people you've broken and expect them to hold you up forever. I lay down on the hotel bed, still in my dress, and stared at the ceiling. Thought about Hayes and Torres and Chen and Washington standing in their dress blues at a wedding, refusing to let their commanding officer be dismissed. Thought about Thomas, holding a deed to a home I'd bought him because he deserved a start I never got. Thought about Senator Crawford calling me an hour after my father had tried to throw me out, offering me a role that would put me in rooms where policy was made and futures were shaped. Thought about my mother, 19 years dead, who'd loved me enough to ask Richard Harmon for nothing, but made him promise one thing: give her a chance. He'd given me a roof, food, education, the bare minimum that law required and conscience demanded, but he'd never given me a chance. So I'd taken one anyway. Built it from morning runs and midnight studying, from West Point and combat deployments, from silent savings and careful planning. Built it until I was standing in front of him holding the deed to his holdings, asking him to choose between his pride and his legacy. I fell asleep still dressed, still wearing the shoes I'd chosen to blend in, still carrying the weight of 41 years of being overlooked. But tomorrow when I woke up, I'd be the woman who owned Harmon Properties. And Richard Harmon would have to decide if he wanted to keep pretending I didn't exist. The coffee shop Thomas chose was aggressively neutral, one of those chains where everything tasted the same whether you were in Savannah or Seattle, where nobody looked twice at strangers having difficult conversations. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 untouched cups steaming between his hands. His tuxedo from last night had been replaced with jeans and a polo shirt that made him look younger, more uncertain. When he saw me, he half stood, then sat back down like he couldn't remember the protocol for greeting a sister he barely knew. I slid into the seat across from him. The coffee was black, no sugar, which meant he'd either guessed or asked someone who knew me. Either way, it was more consideration than I'd expected. Thomas pushed a napkin across the table. On it, he'd written numbers, big ones. Did you really loan Dad $8 million? 9 years ago. When Coastal Bank was calling in the note, his hands were shaking slightly. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because he would have refused it. Would have let the company go under, rather than take help from the daughter he spent 17 years pretending didn't exist. Thomas flinched. I didn't know it was that bad. Growing up, he never talked about you. When I asked, he'd say you were away, working, making your own choices, making my own choices. That was one way to describe being told at 17 that if I walked out the door, I shouldn't come back, that my mother's blood made me something less than family, something to be managed and minimized and eventually erased from the narrative entirely. I sipped the coffee. It burned going down, which felt appropriate. Your father is very good at rewriting history. He's built a business on making things look different than they are. Thomas stared into his cup like it might have answers. Last night, after you left, he locked himself in the library. Wouldn't talk to anyone. Senator Crawford tried to smooth things over, said it was just family drama, nothing to worry about. But people were recording. It's already on social media. He pulled out his phone, showed me. Someone had posted video from the parking lot with the caption, "Millionaire tries to kick out his war hero daughter. Finds out she owns his company." 20,000 views already. Comments ranging from supportive to savage. People I'd never met weighing in on a family fracture that had taken 41 years to crack open. I pushed the phone back, let them talk. Truth doesn't need defense. Thomas rubbed his face. The wedding planner called this morning, asked if we wanted to postpone. Jennifer's parents are concerned about marrying into a family that might be bankrupt in 2 weeks. Are you concerned? He looked up, and for the first time, I saw something in him that reminded me of our mother, not Maria, the woman Richard had erased, but the idea of someone who could see past the money to the people underneath. I'm concerned that I've been living my whole life in a house built on lies, that my father is someone I don't actually know, that my sister, he stopped, corrected himself, that you gave up everything to save a man who couldn't even let you into his own son's wedding. Not everything. I gave up money, that's replaceable. What did you lose that isn't? The question landed heavier than he probably meant it to. I set my coffee down, considered how much truth he could handle, decided he'd earned all of it. I lost the belief that if I was good enough, accomplished enough, quiet enough, I could make him see me. I spent 26 years in uniform thinking maybe this promotion, maybe this medal, maybe this mission would be the one that made him proud. And last night, standing in that parking lot, I finally understood. Nothing would ever be enough. Because the problem wasn't me. It was him. Thomas's eyes were wet. I'm sorry for all of it, for not knowing, for not asking. You were 7 when I left. You're not responsible for his choices, but I am responsible for mine. He straightened up and I watched him decide something. I want to learn about the company, about how to run it without being him. That's not my decision to make. His jaw set in a way that looked familiar, looked like stubbornness I'd seen in mirrors. You own 73%. If he defaults, you're the majority shareholder. That makes it exactly your decision. I pulled the deed from my bag, the one I'd meant to give him at the wedding before everything went sideways. Inside the envelope was more than the condo and the check. There was a letter, 10 pages, handwritten over 3 nights before I'd flown to Georgia. Everything I'd learned about leadership and integrity, and choosing the hard right over the easy wrong. Everything I wish someone had told me at 26, when the world still felt like something I could fix if I just tried hard enough. Read this, I said. All of it. Then tell me what you think Harmon Properties should become. Not what it is, not what your father built. What it could be if someone with integrity was running it. Thomas took the envelope like it was fragile. And if I can't come up with something good enough, then we sell it. Take the money. Build something new from scratch. Sometimes the best thing you can do with a broken foundation is tear it down and start over. The look on his face, hope mixed with terror, mixed with something like relief, told me he'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't had permission to say it out loud. We talked for another hour about his fiancée Jennifer, who worked in nonprofit law and had opinions about generational wealth that made Thanksgiving dinners awkward, about his degree in environmental science that Richard had dismissed as impractical, about the piece of land he'd always loved, 40 acres on the coast, that Harmon Properties owned but never developed because it didn't have enough profit margin to justify Richard's attention. When we stood to leave, Thomas did something I wasn't expecting. He hugged me, quick, awkward, the embrace of someone who wasn't sure it was allowed but was trying anyway. Thank you, he whispered, for saving us, even when we didn't deserve it. I hugged him back, felt something in my chest crack open just slightly. You deserved it, Thomas. You just didn't know it yet. Driving back to my hotel, I passed Harmon Properties headquarters, a gleaming glass tower downtown, 12 stories of chrome and ambition with Richard's name etched above the entrance. I'd been inside exactly twice, once when I was 9, dragged along when the housekeeper was sick, and Richard didn't have anyone to watch me. I'd sat in the lobby for 6 hours with a library book while he closed deals and built his holdings. The second time was when I was 16, bringing him lunch he'd forgotten, and the receptionist had asked if I was there for the cleaning crew. I didn't stop, just drove past, watching it shrink in my rearview mirror like everything else I'd left behind. The hotel message light was blinking when I got back. 3 voicemails, one from Patricia with updates on documentation, one from Senator Crawford's office with meeting details for Monday, one from a number I didn't recognize. Colonel Harmon, this is Dr. Ellen Martinez from Savannah Regional Hospital. We have a patient here asking for you. Lily Chen. She's 17, came in through the ER around midnight. She gave your name as her emergency contact. My hands went cold. I called back immediately, got transferred twice, finally reached Dr. Martinez, who spoke in the careful tone of someone who'd seen this before and hated it every time. Lily came in with a dislocated shoulder, bruised ribs, contusions consistent with defensive wounds. She says she fell downstairs. The stairs would have had to grab her wrists first. I was already grabbing my keys. I'm on my way. The hospital was 20 minutes across town. I made it in 12, parked illegally, didn't care. The ER staff recognized me. Small town, news travels. Apparently being a decorated veteran gets you certain courtesies even in civilian spaces. A nurse walked me back to a curtained bay where Lily sat on an exam table, left arm in a sling, eyes swollen nearly shut from crying. She looked up when I entered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call." I pulled a chair close, sat down so we were eye level. "Tell me what happened." The story came out in fragments. She told her father about the University of Montana scholarship again. Engineering program, full ride, everything paid for. He'd said no. She'd said she was going anyway. He'd grabbed her arm, yanked her around, slammed her into the kitchen counter. When she'd tried to leave, he'd thrown her against the stairs. Her mother had stood there watching, saying nothing, doing nothing. "I took $2,000 from the emergency fund they keep in the freezer," Lily whispered. "And I ran." "Good." She looked up startled. "Good? You protected yourself. You got out. That takes more courage than staying ever will." Dr. Martinez appeared with paperwork. Legally, Lily was a minor. Legally, they should contact her parents. But Dr. Martinez had seen enough battered kids to know when the law and safety were pulling in opposite directions. If she goes back, she'll end up here again. Or somewhere worse. I met the doctor's eyes, understood the question underneath. She won't go back. I'll make sure of that. What followed was a blur of phone calls and paperwork, and conversations with people who held the power to help or hurt. I called Patricia first, who called a family lawyer, who called Child Protective Services. I called Hayes, who somehow materialized at the hospital within 30 minutes, with a duffel bag containing clothes, toiletries, everything a teenage girl might need if she was starting over from nothing. While Lily slept, medicated, and finally safe, I sat in the hallway with Hayes and explained about the scholarship, about Lily's father who saw daughters as property, about cycles that repeat until someone breaks them. Hayes listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "What do you need?" "A safe place for her to stay until CPS sorts custody. References for her college applications. Someone to testify that she's not making this up." Done. His phone was already out, texting, coordinating. "One of the guys from the unit runs a group home for at-risk youth. He'll take her tonight. And ma'am, every single one of us will testify. We know what it looks like when someone's been under fire." The social worker arrived at dawn, a tired woman named Sandra with kind eyes and a briefcase full of forms. She interviewed Lily, photographed her injuries, made notes in handwriting too small to read upside down. When she finished, she looked at me. "You're not family." "No. You're willing to be involved in this case? As a character witness, long-term support if needed?" "Yes." Sandra nodded slowly. "Lily's lucky you were here." "I'm lucky," she called. By the time Lily was discharged, I'd set up a bank account in her name with $5,000. Enough for emergencies. Enough to prove she wasn't dependent on parents who'd rather break her than let her grow. I'd connected her with the university's admissions office, explained the situation in terms that wouldn't derail her scholarship. I'd found a family lawyer who took cases pro bono for abuse survivors, and believed that sometimes the best thing you could do for a child was help them escape. Lily cried when I told her. Not the helpless tears from last night, but something that sounded like relief mixed with disbelief that strangers could show more care than blood. "Why are you doing this?" She asked it like she genuinely didn't understand. "Because someone should have done it for me, and because you deserve better than a father who sees you as something to control instead of someone to love." The words hung there, true for her and true for me, connecting across decades of different damage from similar wounds. Hayes drove Lily to the group home. I went back to the hotel. Fell into bed with my clothes still on. Slept for 3 hours before my phone woke me with a call from Patricia. "We have a problem. Richard just filed a countersuit." I sat up, rubbed my eyes. Countersuit for what? Claiming the 2015 loan was predatory lending. That you took advantage of his desperate situation to charge unconscionable interest rates. He's asking for the contract to be voided. The 2% interest rate I'd given him was lower than any bank would have offered. Lower than friendship. It was family generosity, which apparently meant nothing when the family member was someone he'd spent decades pretending didn't exist. "What are our chances?" Patricia's smile came through the phone. "Excellent. I have emails from him thanking the anonymous benefactor for the generous terms. I have payment records showing he never missed a deadline until 6 months ago. And I have documentation that the market rate in 2015 was between 5 and 7% for commercial loans of that size. He doesn't have a case, he has desperation. Still, we were going to court, which meant discovery, which meant everything would come out. The full history of how Richard Harmon had treated his daughter, how he'd profited from her silence, how the holdings he'd built were standing on foundations she'd poured while he pretended she didn't exist. When's the hearing? 10 days. But Kat, there's something else. I waited. Richard called a town council meeting for tomorrow night. He's on the council, has friends there. I think he's going to try to control the narrative before it controls him. Then we should be there. The Savannah Town Council met in a historic building downtown, all marble columns and brass fixtures that whispered about old money and older power. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying myself with the posture that 26 years of uniform had carved into being. The gallery was already filling. Curious citizens, local reporters, people who'd seen the viral videos and wanted to watch the next chapter unfold in real time. Richard sat at the council table in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, surrounded by men who looked like different versions of him. White, wealthy, comfortable, in their certainty that the world bent to accommodate them. He didn't look at me when I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence, even though I took a seat in the front row where he couldn't possibly miss seeing me. The meeting started with routine business, zoning variance for a new development, budget allocation for road repairs, things that mattered to people's daily lives but felt distant from the personal war being waged in plain sight. Then Richard cleared his throat and asked for a moment to address a personal matter affecting the community. The room quieted. Phones came out. This was what they'd come for. Richard stood, and I watched him put on the face I'd seen 1,000 times. The concerned patriarch, the responsible leader, the man who carried burdens so others didn't have to. Many of you saw unfortunate videos this weekend. My daughter Catherine attempting to disrupt my son's wedding, making wild claims about military service and financial arrangements. Attempting to disrupt, like I was the one who'd stood in a doorway and refused entry. Like I was the one who'd called the daughter I'd saved an irregularity in front of 300 witnesses. I need to clarify some things. Yes, Catherine served in the military. I'm proud of her service, as any father would be. The lie was so smooth, it could have slipped through your fingers. Proud. He'd never used that word about me in 41 years. But now that it served his narrative, suddenly he'd always been the supportive father. However, there are aspects of her service that concern me. She's recently retired, and I believe she may be struggling with readjustment. The accusations she's making about loans and ownership, these are symptoms of someone who needs help, not someone who should be given control of a multi-million-dollar company. Gasps rippled through the gallery. He was doing it, painting me as unstable, as damaged, as someone whose military service had broken her in ways that made her unreliable. It was brilliant in its cruelty, using the thing I'd sacrificed for as evidence of my unsuitability. I ask for the community's understanding as we navigate this difficult family situation. And I want to assure everyone that Harmon Properties remains on solid financial footing under my leadership. He sat down. The council members nodded sympathetically. The trap was closing around me, built from assumptions about veterans and mental health and the ways that women who push back get labeled as hysterical. Patricia leaned close, whispered, "Say nothing, let me handle this." But I didn't need her to handle it. I'd spent 26 years learning how to brief generals and senators, how to speak truth to power without flinching, how to deliver information that people didn't want to hear in ways that made it impossible to ignore. I stood. Chairs scraped as people turned to watch. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to address Councilman Harmon's comments." The chairman, older man, probably went to college with Richard, hesitated. "This is a council meeting, not a public forum." I understand. However, since Councilman Harmon has made public statements about my mental health and financial arrangements, I believe I have a right to respond. The chairman looked at Richard, who nodded slowly. Confident I would hang myself with my own words, probably. Sure that whatever I said would sound like ravings from someone who'd spent too long in combat zones. Patricia handed me a folder. I walked to the front of the room, moved with the calm that comes from knowing exactly what ammunition you're carrying. Councilman Harmon stated that I disrupted his son's wedding. Security footage from the Sterling estate shows that I was invited, appeared on the guest list, and was physically blocked from entry by Councilman Harmon himself. The venue has confirmed this in writing. I laid the first document on the council table, moved to the next. He stated that my claims about military service were wild. Here is my DD 214, my discharge papers showing 26 years of service, final rank of colonel. Here are citations for the Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. Here is a letter from Senator James Crawford, whose daughter married Councilman Harmon's son, confirming my service record and offering me a position as military advisor to the Armed Services Committee. More papers, the pile growing, Richard's face losing color with each one. Regarding the financial arrangements, in 2015, Harmon Properties faced foreclosure. Coastal Bank called in a loan of $8.2 million. Councilman Harmon had 30 days to pay or lose the company. I provided that funding through an LLC at an interest rate of 2%, significantly below market value. Here are the original loan documents, signed by Councilman Harmon. Here are 9 years of payment records. Here is documentation showing that the current balance due is $6.7 million. Payment due October 31st. I paused, let it sink in. Councilman Harmon knew who provided that loan 6 days ago when my attorney informed him. His claim that I'm making wild accusations is false. His suggestion that I'm mentally unstable is a distraction from the fact that he defaulted on a debt and is now trying to avoid consequences. Richard stood, voice rising. You had no right to keep that information from me, to hide who you were. I turned to face him directly. You made it clear 17 years ago that you wanted nothing to do with me. I respected that boundary. I simply ensured that your mistakes didn't destroy the company my half-brother might inherit one day. Then why come forward now, if you were so altruistic? Because you tried to humiliate me at your son's wedding. Because you called me an irregularity in front of 300 people. Because I'm done being erased. The room was dead silent. Every phone was recording, every face was watching this play out like a Greek tragedy in a government building on a Tuesday night. Patricia stood then, smooth and professional. For the record, Mr. Chairman, I filed the complete loan documentation with the county clerk's office. It's public record now. Anyone who wants to verify Colonel Harmon's statements can do so. Additionally, we have emails from Councilman Harmon to the LLC, thanking us for the generous terms and life-saving intervention. Those are also part of the public record. One of the other council members, younger woman, looked like she actually cared about facts, raised her hand. Councilman Harmon, are these documents accurate? Richard opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. The loan is real, yes, but the circumstances are documented, the woman said. In your own words. It seems to me that your daughter saved your company and asked for nothing in return except timely repayment. Is that correct? Richard sat down hard, defeated by his own paper trail, by the words he'd written when he thought he was dealing with a faceless corporation instead of the daughter he'd thrown away. The chairman looked uncomfortable. This seems like a private family matter. Perhaps it should be settled outside this chamber. With respect, Mr. Chairman, I said. It stopped being private when Councilman Harmon used his public platform to question my mental stability and financial claims. I'm not asking for anything from this council except the truth to be on record. The truth was on record now, in meeting minutes that would be published online, in videos that would be shared and dissected and turned into think pieces about family and money, and the ways that powerful men protect themselves by destroying the people who saved them. I walked out of that chamber with my head high and my hands steady. Behind me, I heard the murmur of voices rising like tide, people processing what they'd just witnessed, trying to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the one who'd just been exposed as something smaller. Patricia caught up with me in the parking lot. That was risky. That was necessary. He wanted to control the narrative. Now the narrative controls him. What if the court still sides with him? Then I take 73% of his company and spend the rest of my life making sure it stands for something better than his ego. We stood there in this cooling evening, watching people stream out of the building, their faces lit by phone screens as they typed and shared and turned private pain into public spectacle. I should have felt victorious, should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired, bone-deep exhausted in the way that comes from fighting battles you never wanted, from winning wars that cost you pieces of yourself you'll never get back. Patricia's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. Richard just left the building through the back entrance. Witnesses say he looked unwell. Unwell how? Shaken. One person said he was crying. The image of my father, Richard Harmon, real estate mogul, self-made millionaire, man who'd never shown weakness in my presence, crying in a parking lot behind a government building, hit me harder than I expected. Not with satisfaction, with something that felt uncomfortably like grief. Do we know where he went? Patricia made calls. 10 minutes later, his car's gone. Security footage shows him heading east on Highway 80, toward Tybee Island, the beach house. Richard had bought it 20 years ago, a place to escape when Savannah felt too small or too demanding. I'd never been inside, never been invited. But I knew it existed the way you know about rooms in a house you're not allowed to enter. Should we follow him? Number, let him process. He's earned that much. What he'd earned was consequences. What he'd earned was the knowledge that actions come with prices, that you can't build wealth on the backs of people you've broken and expect them to hold you up forever. But he was still my father, still the man who'd raised me even if he'd done it badly. And watching him crack open in public was harder than I'd imagined it would be. I drove back to the hotel through streets that felt different now, like the city itself had shifted its opinion of me. At a stoplight, a woman in the next car rolled down her window. "You're the colonel, right? From the video?" I nodded. "Thank you. My daughter's in the army. It matters that someone like you exists." The light changed. She drove away before I could respond, before I could tell her that existing wasn't the same as thriving, that being visible didn't erase the years of being overlooked. Back in my room, I found a voicemail from Thomas. "Just wanted you to know, Jennifer and I talked. We're not postponing, we're getting married next month. Smaller ceremony, just family who actually acts like family. I hope you'll come. Real invitation this time." I saved the message. Listened to it twice more before falling asleep, letting his voice, hopeful, tentative, trying, remind me that not all Harmon men were built the same way. Morning came with news. Richard hadn't returned to his house in Savannah. His assistant was fielding calls from business partners who'd seen the council meeting videos and wanted reassurance. The court date for the countersuit was set for next Tuesday, which gave us 8 days to prepare, and Richard 8 days to decide if he was going to keep fighting or finally surrender. Patricia called while I was drinking hotel coffee and staring at my laptop. We got discovery documents. Richard's claiming emotional distress, undue influence, breach of fiduciary duty, none of which will hold up in court. No, but it'll drag this out, make it ugly. Are you prepared for that? I've been prepared since I was 8 years old. What I wasn't prepared for was the email waiting in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line, from a concerned father. I opened it against my better judgment. "Catherine, you've made your point. You've humiliated me publicly, destroyed my reputation, turned my own son against me. I hope you're satisfied, but please understand. Everything I did because I was trying to protect you. Your mother was a mistake I made in a moment of weakness. I gave you a home, an education, opportunities. And this is how you repay me? By taking everything I built?" The email went on for 3 pages. Self-justification wrapped in victimhood. Accountability dodged behind claims of good intentions. He'd protected me by calling me an irregularity, by making me eat dinner in the kitchen while he entertained at the family table, by telling me at 17 that if I left, I shouldn't come back. I closed the laptop, didn't respond. Some things don't deserve the dignity of engagement. Instead, I drove to the group home where Lily was staying, found her in the common room, shoulder healing, eyes clearer than they'd been in the hospital. She looked up when I entered, smiled in a way that reminded me of Maria Reyes, my mother, who'd loved me enough to die asking Richard for one thing: give her a chance. "How are you?" "Better, scared, but better." I sat beside her on a couch that had seen better decades. Being scared means you're paying attention. That's not weakness. The social worker says my parents are fighting the custody evaluation, saying I'm lying about what happened. They would. Abusers always do. Lily's hands twisted in her lap. What if I can't prove it? What if they make me go back? "You won't go back. I won't let that happen." The promise felt bigger than I had right to make, but I made it anyway. Because sometimes all that stands between a child and destruction is one person willing to say, "Not on my watch." We talked about college, about engineering programs and roommate selection, and all the ordinary anxieties that came with leaving home, even when home was a place you were running from. We talked about her mother, who'd stood silent while her husband broke their daughter, and the complicated grief of mourning someone who was still alive but already lost. When I left, Lily walked me to the door. Thank you for being someone I could call. Thank you for being brave enough to call. On the drive back, I passed Harmon Properties headquarters again. This time I pulled into the parking garage, rode the elevator to the 12th floor, walked through glass doors etched with my father's name. The receptionist looked up, recognition and uncertainty warring on her face. I'm here to see the CFO. Do you have an appointment? No, but I own 73% of this company. I don't need one. 10 minutes later, I sat across from Marcus Chen, 52 years old, Chinese-American, 20 years with Harmon Properties, and a reputation for honest accounting in an industry built on creative math. He looked nervous, which I understood. The woman who just publicly destroyed his boss was now sitting in his office asking to see books. I'm not here to fire anyone, I said. I'm here to understand what I'm inheriting. What followed was 4 hours of spreadsheets and profit margins and revelations about how Richard had been running the company. Not illegally, Marcus assured me, but ethically? That was murkier. Contracts that displaced low-income families, developments that ignored environmental concerns, profits maximized at the expense of communities that couldn't fight back. If you had control, Marcus asked carefully, what would you change? Everything. I'd start by asking what this company could build instead of what it could extract. He smiled for the first time. I was hoping you'd say that. We talked until the sun set, building frameworks for a company that could be profitable without being predatory, that could create value without destroying communities. It felt like mission planning, assessing resources, identifying objectives, building strategies that could actually work instead of just sounding good on paper. When I finally left the building, I understood what I was fighting for. Not revenge against Richard, not vindication for myself, but the chance to take something he'd built on exploitation and remake it into something that could actually help people. Patricia called as I was walking to my car. Richard's attorney wants to meet. Settlement discussion. When? Tomorrow, 10 a.m., downtown. Tell them I'll be there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay in the hotel bed, watching headlights sweep across the ceiling, thinking about Richard crying in a parking lot, about Thomas trying to become something better than his father, about Lily Chen starting over with nothing but courage and a scholarship, thinking about the years I'd spent trying to earn love from a man who saw affection as something to be withheld until people proved themselves worthy. My mother had never done that. Maria Reyes had loved me unconditionally, fiercely, right up until the cancer took her and left me with a man who saw me as evidence of his moral failing. But maybe that was the gift she'd given me. The knowledge that love without conditions exists. That family isn't about blood, but about who stands beside you when the ground gives way. I thought about the soldiers who'd stood up for me at the wedding, about Thomas bringing me coffee and asking how to be better, about Lily trusting me enough to call when she had nowhere else to go. These were my people, not because we shared DNA, because we shared values, because when it mattered, we chose each other. And that, I realized, was worth more than any inheritance Richard could take away or court could give back. Sleep finally came around 3 a.m., thin and restless, but enough to get me through to morning, to the settlement meeting where Richard would have to decide, keep fighting or finally let go. Keep pretending I didn't exist or finally acknowledge that I'd been holding his world together all along. Either way, I would survive. I'd survived worse. I'd survived combat and loss and 41 years of being treated as expendable. This would just be one more battle in a war I'd already won the day I stopped needing his approval. The settlement meeting took place in a conference room that smelled like furniture polish and desperation. Richard's attorney was a woman in her 60s, expensive suit, the kind of lawyer who specialized in making rich men's problems disappear. She laid out terms like she was doing me a favor. Richard would acknowledge the debt, agree to a payment plan stretching over 15 years, and I would release all claims to company ownership. Patricia didn't even open her briefcase. Those terms are unacceptable. The contract specifies payment in full by October 31st. That's 12 days from now. The attorney's smile was practiced, condescending. Surely Colonel Harmon understands that liquidating assets of this magnitude takes time. We're asking for reasonableness. I leaned forward. I gave your client 9 years of reasonableness, 2% interest when market rate was 7, flexible payment terms, complete anonymity so his pride wouldn't be wounded. He repaid that generosity by trying to bar me from a family event and publicly questioning my mental stability. Richard sat at the far end of the table, smaller somehow than he'd been at the wedding. His hands were folded, knuckles white, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. For 41 years, I'd wanted him to look at me and see something worth keeping. Now that he finally saw me, he couldn't bear to hold the gaze. His attorney tried again. Mr. Harmon has agreed to issue a public apology for his comments at the council meeting. I don't want an apology. I want the $6.7 million he owes me. Or I want the company. Those are the only two outcomes here. The room went quiet. Outside, Savannah traffic hummed. Inside, we all understood that this was the moment, the point where Richard either chose to humble himself or lose everything trying to avoid it. Patricia slid a document across the table. We've had Harmon properties independently appraised. Current value is $21 million. If Mr. Harmon defaults, Colonel Harmon's 73% stake is worth approximately $15 million. She's willing to sell her shares back to Mr. Harmon for $12 million, a 40% discount, payable over 10 years at 3% interest. It was more generous than he deserved. We both knew it. The attorney knew it. Richard's hands were shaking now, betraying whatever calm his face was trying to project. Why would you do that? The attorney's suspicion was reasonable. Nobody gave discounts to people who'd wronged them unless there was a catch. Because Thomas deserves the chance to inherit something that isn't poisoned by litigation. And because I don't want to spend the next 5 years running a company I never asked for. I looked at Richard then, made him meet my eyes. But if you default, if you refuse this offer, I will take that company, I will rename it, I will spend every dollar of profit helping people you would have displaced, and I will make sure that when people Google your name, they find the story of how you built your holdings on your daughter's sacrifice, and then tried to erase her when the bill came due. His attorney looked at him, waiting for instructions. He sat frozen, trapped between options that both required admitting he'd been wrong. The meeting ended without resolution. Richard's attorney asked for 48 hours to discuss with her client. Patricia agreed, packed her briefcase with the efficient movements of someone who knew she'd already won. In the parking garage, she turned to me. You gave him an out, a generous one. I gave him a choice. That's more than he ever gave me. What if he doesn't take it? Then I keep my promise. The next 2 days felt like waiting for artillery fire you could hear coming but couldn't see. I visited Lily at the group home, brought her books on engineering and college life. She was healing, shoulder out of the sling now, bruises fading from purple to yellow-green, eyes clearer each time I saw her. We sat in the common room while other kids watched TV or did homework, or just existed in the careful way of people who'd learned that safety was temporary, and peace was something you borrowed, not owned. I'm scared, Lily admitted, not of my parents anymore, of everything else, college, being on my own. What if I can't do it? I pulled out my phone, showed her a photo. It was from my first week at West Point, me in combat boots that gave me blisters, uniform that didn't quite fit, face set in determination that was 90% terror and 10% stubbornness. That's me at 18, terrified, convinced I'd fail, certain everyone there belonged except me. What changed? I stopped trying to belong and started trying to succeed. Turns out those are different things. Lily studied the photo. You look so young. I was, but I learned something important. Fear doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're doing something that matters. We talked about her university application. She'd written her essay about resilience, about learning that leaving toxic situations wasn't abandonment, it was survival. About how the people who loved you wanted you to grow, not shrink to fit their comfort. The admissions counselor called it raw and powerful, Lily said, but also asked if I was sure I wanted to share something so personal. What did you tell them? That silence protects abusers. That if my story helps one other kid realize they're not alone, it's worth it. I felt something in my chest expand, pride, maybe, or hope. Or just the recognition of seeing yourself in someone brave enough to become what you couldn't be at their age. On the evening of the second day, Patricia called. He's not taking the settlement. The words landed without surprise. Some men would rather burn everything down than admit they were wrong. Richard Harmon was that kind of man. Then we proceed with the lawsuit. And when we win, I take the company. Kat, there's something else. He's scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Harmon Properties lobby. Of course he had. One last attempt to control the narrative, to paint himself as the victim of a vindictive daughter who'd weaponized his generosity against him. Should we be there? Number, let him have his moment, it won't change the outcome. But I went anyway, not to the lobby. I watched from across the street, standing in the doorway of a coffee shop with a clear view of the entrance. Richard stood on the steps in another expensive suit, microphone in hand, cameras pointed at his face. He spoke about family loyalty and ungrateful children, and the pain of being attacked by someone he'd raised. He produced documents, carefully selected emails, payment records without context, character references from business associates who'd never seen how he treated me behind closed doors. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If you didn't know the full story, you'd think he was a wronged father dealing with a daughter who'd turned against him for profit. But the reporters knew. Someone had done their homework, leaked the full council meeting video, found the wedding footage, interviewed the soldiers who'd stood up for me. The questions came fast and pointed. Mr. Harmon, is it true you blocked your daughter from your son's wedding? Is it true she saved your company in 2015? Is it true you called her mentally unstable at a public council meeting? Richard's composure cracked, voice rising, face flushing, the mask slipping to reveal the anger underneath. This is a private family matter being exploited by someone who wants revenge for imagined slights. Imagined slights. Like being told I didn't belong. Like being erased from family photos and conversations. Like spending 41 years as an inconvenient truth in a narrative that preferred fiction. I turned away from the press conference and walked back to my hotel. Let Richard have his tantrum. Let him rage against consequences that felt unfair, because he'd never had to face them before. The truth was already out there, documented and verified and impossible to spin away. That evening, Thomas called. Have you seen the videos from Dad's press conference? I saw enough. It's bad, Kat. Really bad. People are calling him out everywhere. The company's social media is being flooded with comments about hypocrisy and misogyny, and he trailed off, voice thick. I don't know what to do. You focus on your wedding. Focus on building a life with Jennifer. This isn't your mess to clean up, but he's my father, and you're not responsible for his choices. Love him if you can. Support him if you want, but don't set yourself on fire to keep him warm. The line went quiet for a long moment. Jennifer said something similar, about boundaries. She sounds smart. She is. She also said, Thomas hesitated. She said if Dad loses the company, she wants us to walk away from the money entirely. Start fresh with just what we earn. What do you want? I want to stop feeling like I owe him something for existing. I want to build things instead of managing his disasters. Then do that. The inheritance will be there if you change your mind. But freedom is worth more than money. After we hung up, I sat on the hotel bed and thought about legacies. Richard had spent his life building his business, accumulating wealth and property and power. He'd measured his worth in dollars and deeds, in the size of his name on buildings, and the deference of people who wanted his favor. But what would people remember? Not the properties or the profits. They'd remember how he'd treated his daughter, how he'd taken her money and erased her existence, how he'd chosen pride over love every single time the choice was offered. That was his legacy, not what he'd built, the emptiness where family should have been. The next week passed in legal motions and court filings. Richard's countersuit was dismissed. Predatory lending claims don't work when you have emails thanking the lender for generous terms. The judge set a hearing date for the debt collection, October 29th, 2 days before the payment was due. On October 28th, the night before the hearing, someone leaked security footage to local news. Richard at a bar downtown, drunk, telling anyone who'd listen that his ungrateful daughter was trying to steal everything he'd built. That military service didn't make you a hero, just made you good at following orders. That she'd always been worthless and he should have known better than to take in an illegitimate child. The footage went viral within hours, not because of what he said. Plenty of bitter fathers said terrible things about their daughters, but because of who was listening. A reporter from the Savannah Tribune sitting 3 stools down. recording everything, noting the time and date and the whiskey-soaked confession of a man who'd finally stopped pretending. Patricia called at midnight. Have you seen it? I'm watching it now. This changes everything. He just admitted paternity, admitted taking you in as an obligation, admitted he's always seen you as worthless. In a public bar, on camera. I know. Kat, this isn't just about the money anymore. This is character assassination. We can sue for defamation, emotional distress added to the existing case. No. I don't want to sue him for being a terrible father. I just want him to pay what he owes or give up what he can't afford to keep. Patricia sighed. You're more generous than he deserves. I'm not generous. I'm just tired of feeding a fight that should have ended 41 years ago. But the video had consequences Richard hadn't anticipated. By morning, 3 major clients had pulled their contracts. The bank that held the mortgage on Harmon Properties headquarters called for an emergency meeting. Employees were updating their resumes, afraid the company would collapse before they could jump ship. Thomas called at 7 a.m., voice raw from crying or shouting or both. Dad's falling apart, he hasn't slept, won't eat, just keeps drinking and watching the video and saying he's ruined. Is he safe? I don't know, Jennifer and I are at the house. He won't let us in his room. Call his doctor, get someone there who can assess him. And Thomas, this isn't your fault. Feels like it should be someone's fault. It is, it's his. But that doesn't mean you have to watch him self-destruct. The court hearing at 10 a.m. felt anticlimactic. Richard didn't show. His attorney appeared, filed for a continuance, cited health concerns. The judge was unsympathetic. Richard had had 9 years to make payments, 2 weeks since official notification, and multiple opportunities to settle. Motion denied, judgment entered in favor of Catherine Harmon for $6.7 million, plus legal fees. Default triggers contractual transfer of ownership per the original loan agreement. Just like that, I owned 73% of my father's business. Patricia looked at me across the courthouse table. How do you feel? Empty. I thought winning would feel different, like vindication or justice or at least relief. Instead, it felt like standing in the ruins of something that had never been whole in the first place. What do you want to do? I want to talk to him, one more time. Not as the daughter begging for love, as the creditor deciding his fate. Richard's house was the same one I'd grown up in, the one where I'd slept in the servants' wing and learned to be unseen. Thomas met me at the door, face haggard. He's in the study, won't come out. The doctor says it's not medical, it's psychological, depression maybe, or just the crash that comes when reality stops being optional. Can I go up? Please, maybe he'll listen to you. I climbed stairs I'd climbed 1,000 times, each step a memory. Being 10 and trying to bring Richard lunch he'd forgotten, being told the housekeeper would handle it, being 13 and showing him a soccer trophy, being told not to brag, being 16 and asking if he was proud of my grades, being told that intelligence without breeding was just cleverness. The study door was locked. I knocked. Richard? Go away. I own this house now. Technically, I can have the locks changed. Silence. Then the click of the deadbolt. The door opened 6 inches. Richard stood in the gap, looking like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled like he'd been sleeping in it. What do you want? His voice was hoarse, defeated. To give you one more choice. Haven't you taken enough? I haven't taken anything you didn't give up voluntarily, but I'm offering you a way out. One last time. I pulled out the paperwork Patricia had prepared. A revised settlement offer. Richard could keep the company if he agreed to 3 conditions. Mandatory retirement from CEO position with Thomas taking over, public acknowledgement of my role in saving the company, and enrollment in a treatment program for whatever was breaking him from the inside out. You want me to step down from my own company? It's not your company anymore, it's mine. I'm offering to let you keep working there in a diminished capacity while Thomas learns to run it properly. Or you can refuse, and I'll sell it to the highest bidder, and you'll get nothing. Why would you do this? Because Thomas asked me to, because he believes you can be better than you've been. I don't share his optimism, but I respect his hope. Richard took the papers with shaking hands, read them slowly, lips moving. And if I refuse? Then you leave with nothing. No company, no reputation, no second chances. He sat down heavily in his desk chair, the same chair he'd sat in when I was 8, and he told me I'd be living here now, that I should be grateful that he was doing more than obligation required. I never meant for it to go this way, he said finally. You meant for me to stay unseen, to be grateful for scraps, to never ask for more than you were willing to give. It went this way because I refused to keep shrinking. Richard pressed his palms against his eyes. I was afraid. Of what? That if you succeeded, it would prove I'd been wrong about you. That everything I told myself about your mother, about your blood, about your worth, it would all be lies. And I'd have to live with knowing I'd thrown away something precious because my ego was too fragile to handle being wrong. The confession hung between us, more honest than anything he'd ever said to me. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like grieving something that had died long before either of us admitted it was gone. You have 48 hours to sign those papers or reject them. After that, the offer expires. I walked out without looking back, left him sitting in that study with the ghost of every choice that had led here, every moment he could have chosen differently, and hadn't. Thomas was waiting in the foyer. Well, I gave him an option. Whether he takes it is up to him. And if he doesn't, then you inherit a cautionary tale instead of a company. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I tried to distract myself, visited Lily, who was settling into the group home and talking about engineering programs with the kind of excitement that made futures feel possible. Met with Marcus Chen to discuss transition plans, regardless of Richard's choice. Went for long runs along the Savannah River, trying to outpace thoughts that followed anyway. On the evening of the second day, Patricia called. He signed. All 3 conditions? Every one. He's checking into a treatment facility tomorrow. Asked if Thomas could run the company with you as silent majority owner until he proves he can do it without your intervention. And the public acknowledgement. He wrote a statement. It's actually genuine. No spin, just truth. The statement appeared on Harmon Properties' website that night, posted to social media, sent to every news outlet that had covered the story. It was 2 paragraphs that felt like they'd been written in blood. I am Richard Harmon. 41 years ago, I made a choice to raise my daughter Catherine as an obligation rather than a blessing. I denied her place in our family, dismissed her accomplishments, and tried to erase her from my legacy. 9 years ago, when my company faced ruin, she saved it. Anonymously, generously, asking for nothing, I repaid that kindness with cruelty. I am entering treatment to address the fear and pride that drove those choices. I don't deserve forgiveness. I'm simply acknowledging truth. My daughter is a better person than I ever taught her to be. And Harmon Properties survived because of her, not me. Thomas called 30 seconds after I finished reading. Did you see it? I saw it. That's the most honest thing he's ever written. Honesty doesn't erase harm, Thomas. It's just a starting place. But it's a start, right? Maybe. We'd see. Words were cheap. Actions over time would tell the real story. Richard checked into a facility in Atlanta specializing in executives with substance issues and untreated trauma. The program was intensive. Group therapy twice daily, individual sessions, family counseling when patients were ready. Minimum stay was 90 days. Most people stayed longer. Thomas drove up every weekend with Jennifer, who sat with their broken father, and tried to help him find pieces worth keeping. They'd come back exhausted, emotionally wrung out, but determined. After the 3rd visit, Thomas called me. He's different, not fixed, but working on it. He asked if you'd be willing to visit. Is he asking because he wants to see me or because his therapist told him to? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Does it matter? Yes, I'm not interested in being part of his healing process if it's just another item on a recovery checklist. If he genuinely wants to talk, I'll consider it. But I need to know it's real. I'll ask him. I focused on rebuilding. Marcus Chen and I restructured Harmon Properties from the ground up, divesting from projects that displaced vulnerable communities, investing in sustainable development, creating a foundation that would fund affordable housing. Thomas shadowed us, learning, asking questions, making suggestions that showed he'd inherited something better than his father's ruthlessness. One afternoon in November, Thomas presented an idea: convert the 40-acre coastal property, the one he'd always loved, into a nature preserve with sustainable housing for low-income families, partner with environmental groups, create jobs, leave something better than we found it. Marcus and I exchanged glances. This is going to cost money, not make it. Thomas smiled. Jennifer says profit isn't the only measure of success. She's helping me run the numbers. We think we can make it work. Then make it work, I said. Show me a plan. He did. 3 weeks later, detailed proposal in hand, environmental impact studies, community feedback, financial projections that proved it could break even in 10 years and thrive in 20. I signed the approval that afternoon. This is what Harmon Properties should be. Lily Chen graduated high school in December, 2 months after I'd first met her in that hospital bed. The ceremony was small. The group home kids, their caseworkers, a handful of teachers who'd seen potential and nurtured it. Lily's parents didn't attend. According to the social worker, they'd signed away custody rights rather than face abuse charges, which told you everything about their priorities. Lily gave the valedictorian speech in a voice that only shook once. She talked about second chances and people who see you when you're overlooked, about boundaries that protect instead of punish, about choosing family instead of accepting whatever cruelty biology hands you. There's someone here today who taught me that silence isn't surrender, it's strategy, that leaving isn't weakness when staying means losing yourself. She looked directly at me. Colonel Harmon showed me that the best revenge against people who try to make you small is refusing to shrink, building a life so full of purpose that their opinions become background noise you barely notice. The applause was thunderous in the small auditorium. I stood with everyone else, crying in a way I hadn't let myself cry through the lawsuit or the press conference or any of it. Crying because this girl, this brave, brilliant girl, had taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into fuel for becoming exactly who she was meant to be. After the ceremony, Lily found me in the parking lot. I got the acceptance letter. University of Montana, full ride. I pulled her into a hug. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. You did it despite me. I just made sure you had a safe place to land. She held on for another moment, then stepped back. Will you come visit when I'm at school? Try and stop me. We spent the afternoon shopping for dorm supplies, sheets and towels, and the small necessities of building a home away from home. Lily picked out a desk lamp shaped like a crane, elegant and functional. It reminds me of you, she said, standing tall, focused, ready to take flight. I bought it for her along with everything else. Watched her face light up with each item we added to the cart. Watched her build a future one purchase at a time. As we loaded boxes into my car, she asked, "Do you ever regret it, saving your father's company, giving him another chance?" I thought about it. Regret implies wishing you'd chosen differently. I don't wish that. But I won't pretend it didn't cost me something. What did it cost? The belief that he'd ever become the father I needed him to be. I traded that for something more valuable, the knowledge that I could build something good from wreckage. That legacy doesn't have to mean blood. Lily nodded slowly. That's what I'm trying to do. With college. With my whole life. Build something good from what tried to break me. Then you're already succeeding. 3 months after Richard entered treatment, he came home. 76 years old, 20 pounds lighter, eyes clearer, but carrying weight that wasn't physical. Thomas said he'd stopped drinking, started therapy twice a week, and spent most of his time in his garden pulling weeds and planting things that might bloom if he tended them properly. He called me once, asked if we could talk. Not now, not until I was ready, but eventually. I told him maybe. If he proved through actions that treatment stuck. If he showed me he understood what he'd done. He said that was fair. Thanked me for considering it. Hung up without asking for more. It was the first conversation we'd had in 41 years, where he didn't demand, didn't manipulate, didn't try to control the outcome. It was a start. On Veterans Day, I attended the memorial service in Savannah's Forsyth Park. The city honored local veterans, read names of the fallen, played taps while the sun set through live oaks draped in Spanish moss. I stood in my dress uniform, medals catching light, and felt the familiar weight of service, the pride and grief and complicated love for a country that didn't always love you back but still demanded your best. Richard was there, standing in the back, separate from the main crowd. He didn't approach me, just stood at a distance, watching the ceremony with an expression I couldn't read from 50 yards away. When it ended, when the crowd dispersed and the sun finished setting, he walked over. Stopped 10 feet away, maintaining the boundary I'd set without being asked. Catherine, Richard. We stood in that space, two people connected by biology and trauma, and a company that had nearly destroyed us both. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying, to be someone who could have been worth knowing. I'm glad you're trying. Can I He hesitated. Can I ask how you're doing? I'm running a company I never wanted. Mentoring a girl who reminds me of who I might have been if someone had helped me earlier, and accepting a position advising senators on military policy. I'm busy. That's good. Busy is good. The conversation felt like walking on ice, careful, testing each step, aware that one wrong word could crack everything open again. Thomas is doing well, Richard offered, at the company. He has ideas I never would have considered. He has integrity you never taught him. He learned that somewhere else. Richard flinched but didn't argue. Yes, he did. We stood in awkward silence while the park emptied around us. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. Would you be willing to have coffee sometime? Not now, not until you're ready. Just eventually? Maybe. If you prove that treatment stuck. If you show me through actions, not words, that you understand what you did. Fair enough. He turned to leave, then stopped. Catherine, the statement I wrote about you saving the company. I meant every word. I know, that's why it mattered. He walked away across the park, shoulders bowed, moving like a man carrying weight he'd finally accepted he couldn't set down. I watched him go and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but the smallest possibility that maybe, someday, we could exist in the same space without one of us having to disappear. That night, back at the condo I'd finally moved into, small place, nothing fancy, but mine in a way nothing had ever been before, I wrote an email to Lily. You asked me once what I'd learned from all this. Here's what I know. Boundaries aren't walls that keep people out. They're foundations that keep you stable when everything else is shaking. Silence isn't absence. It's choosing when and how to speak so your words carry weight instead of just making noise. And revenge, real revenge, isn't about making someone smaller. It's about refusing to let them make you smaller anymore. My father tried to erase me. I responded by becoming impossible to ignore. Not through anger or cruelty, but through building a life so full of purpose and integrity that his opinion became irrelevant. That's what I want for you. Not revenge against your parents. Just a life so beautifully, completely yours that their rejection becomes background noise you barely hear. You're going to do extraordinary things, Lily. I can't wait to watch. I hit send and sat back, thinking about the girl I'd been at 17. Terrified, desperate for approval, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, I could earn love from a man who didn't know how to give it. I wished I could go back and tell her, stop trying, save that energy, build something for yourself instead of begging for scraps from tables where you were never meant to sit. But maybe I didn't need to tell her. Maybe saving Lily was saving that 17-year-old girl. Maybe every person I helped was a way of going back and offering myself the hand no one had extended when I needed it most. My phone buzzed. Thomas. Jennifer and I set a date, January 14th. Small ceremony, friends and family who actually show up when it matters. Your family. Please come. I typed back, I'll be there. This time nobody would stop me at the door. This time I wasn't asking permission to belong. I was accepting an invitation from someone who saw me clearly and chose me anyway. 2 weeks before Thomas's wedding, Richard asked if we could meet. Not for coffee. He wasn't ready for that much casual intimacy. But for a walk, neutral ground, time limited. Easy to leave if it went wrong. I agreed. We met at Forsyth Park on a Tuesday morning, cold enough that our breath made clouds, but not cold enough to drive us inside. Richard was bundled in a coat I didn't recognize, scarf wrapped tight, hands shoved in pockets. We walked the perimeter in silence for a while. Finally, he spoke. My therapist says I need to make amends. Not because it makes me feel better, because it's what you deserve. I don't need amends. I need to know you understand what you did. He nodded. I do. Or I'm beginning to. He stopped walking, turned to face me. I told myself I was protecting you by keeping you at a distance, that loving you would be admitting I'd wronged your mother, that if I treated you like family, I'd have to face what I'd done. What had you done? Loved someone I wasn't supposed to love. Got her pregnant. Let her die alone, because helping her would have meant admitting she mattered. His voice cracked on the last word. I watched a man who'd never cried in my presence fight tears he couldn't quite contain. Every time I looked at you, I saw Maria. Saw what I destroyed. So I destroyed you too. Slowly. By making you invisible. By telling you that you weren't enough. You told me I was a mistake. You were never a mistake, Catherine. You were proof that I was. And I couldn't live with that, so I made you live with it instead. We walked in silence again. Somewhere in the trees, birds called to each other. Traffic hummed on the streets surrounding the park. Life continued around us while we tried to excavate truth from 41 years of debris. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I know, but I'm willing to try something else. Coexistence. We show up for Thomas, we're civil, we see what happens from there. Richard nodded. That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. We finished the walk, parted ways at the fountain in the center of the park. He didn't try to hug me or shake my hand, just nodded once, respecting the gesture, and walked away. It wasn't healing. It wasn't closure. It was two people agreeing to stop hurting each other on purpose. For now, that was enough. Thomas's wedding was everything the first one wasn't. Small, 40 people instead of 300. Intimate, real. They held it on the 40-acre coastal property, the one that would become a nature preserve, with the ocean as their backdrop and seabirds as their witnesses. Jennifer wore a dress she'd bought off the rack, altered herself. Thomas wore his father's suit from 20 years ago, tailored to fit him now. They wrote their own vows, promises about partnership and honesty and choosing each other every day, even the hard days. Richard attended, sat in the back row, cried quietly when Thomas mentioned learning from mistakes not to repeat them. Left before the reception started, knowing his presence would complicate what should be simple joy. I stood up front. Thomas had asked me to officiate, got me ordained online, trusted me to hold space for the most important moment of his life. As I pronounced them married, as they kissed to applause from people who loved them, I felt something release in my chest. Not forgiveness, not peace, something simpler, hope. Hope that Thomas would build better than his father had. Hope that cycles could be broken. Hope that family could mean something other than damage passed down through generations like cursed heirlooms. At the reception, Hayes and Torres and Chen and Washington cornered me near the champagne. "Ma'am," Hayes said, "we heard you're advising the Armed Services Committee. Starting next month? Good. They need people who've actually been downrange, who know what it costs." We raised glasses, toasted absent friends, Morrison and the others we'd lost, Maria Reyes, who'd loved me before anyone else knew how, all the people who'd shaped us and left us and made us who we were through loss. Later, as the sun set over the ocean, Thomas found me standing at the edge of the property line. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, the company, the condo, this land, but mostly for showing me what integrity looks like. You're going to do good things, Thomas. We're going to do good things. You're still majority owner, still my partner in this." I smiled. Then let's make something worth keeping. I left before the dancing started, drove back to Savannah through twilight that turned the world soft and forgiving. Stopped at Lily's group home to drop off care packages for her Montana dorm. Snacks and socks and little comforts that said someone was thinking about her. She wasn't there, out with friends, the caseworker said, living her life, building her future, exactly as she should be. I went home to my small condo, made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and let the night end without arguing with it. Tomorrow, Senator Crawford's office would send briefing materials for my first committee meeting. Tomorrow, Thomas would start implementing the Nature Preserve project. Tomorrow, Richard would continue therapy, continue trying to grow something better in soil he'd poisoned. Tomorrow held possibilities I hadn't imagined a month ago, a year ago. 41 years ago, when Richard Harmon told an 8-year-old girl she should be grateful for scraps. But tonight, I sat in silence. That was mine. In space I'd claimed. In a life I'd built from sacrifice and stubbornness, and the stubborn refusal to let someone else's limitations become my ceiling. I thought about boundaries, not as walls, but as architecture. Frameworks that let you build higher because the foundation is sound. I thought about silence, not as absence, but as power held in reserve, words saved for when they'd matter most. I thought about revenge, not as destruction, but as construction, building something so true that lies couldn't touch it. Richard Harmon had tried to make me small, had tried to erase me from the family story and the company I'd saved. Instead, he'd taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that you don't need permission to take up space. You don't need approval to be worthy. You don't need someone else's love to prove you deserve to exist. You just need the courage to stand in your truth and let the people who can't see it fall away. That was the real inheritance, not money or property or power. Freedom, and I was finally truly free.